What if I told you that NASA may have detected signs of intelligent life coming from distant exoplanets, but decided to hide it from humanity? Sounds like something out of science fiction, right? But what if it isn't? What if, right now, there is confidential data locked away on top-secret servers, records of unexplained transmissions, and mathematical patterns from deep space that have never reached the public? Have you ever stopped to think why, despite the billions invested in space, technology, and the thousands of planets discovered, none has concrete evidence of intelligent life been officially revealed? Something doesn't add up in recent years. Several scientists and astronomers have reported capturing curious signals coming from stellar systems with potentially habitable exoplanets. But most of these records simply disappeared from the news, or it was explained as interference, coincidence, or strategy. After all, we are talking about the same space agency that has already been accused of manipulating images of Mars, omitting discoveries on the Moon, and operating secret programs that were never disclosed. Isn't it strange that, with so much information circulating, it's still taboo to talk about intelligent signals outside of Earth, even more so from sources as respected as NASA itself? What exactly have they found these exoplanets that they preferred to keep silent? What you discover now may surprise you, and maybe even change the way you see the universe. Stay with me until the end, because in this video, we will delve behind the scenes of NASA's secret missions, dig through leaked documents, and revisit cases that may have been buried on purpose. If you've ever suspected that there's something much bigger going on above our heads, something that wasn't meant to be revealed, then you're in the right place. Now, take a deep breath, because what comes next may be more real than you imagine. And at this moment, as we start to connect the dots, I want to know what you feel about all this. Have you ever had that strange feeling that something bigger is being kept from our eyes? That intuition that the truth is often hidden right under our noses, but no one wants to talk about it. If this topic makes sense to you, leave here in the comments what has touched you most so far. Your opinion is more important than you might think. It's what fuels this community of curious, skeptical, and truth seekers like you. In fact, if this type of content resonates with what you believe, if it instigates you, if it makes you think outside the box, leave a like on this video. It may seem like a simple click, but it makes all the difference. Help this content be delivered to more people who, like you, want to understand what's behind the scenes at NASA, space discoveries, and the silences that scream. And of course, if you're new here, subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications. This is just the beginning of a much bigger journey. We are building a community that is not satisfied with what they say is the official version we investigate. Question, share. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content that the mainstream media avoids touching. Prepare your mind, because the next revelation could be even more surprising. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we start to connect current events with the behind the scenes of what is being discovered, something changes within us. It's no longer just a curiosity or vague theory. It is a different perception of reality. The hidden truth begins to show its cracks, and those who are attentive feel it. In recent years, some discoveries have gone almost unnoticed by the general public. One of them happened in 2020, when a team of astronomers from Australia captured a signal coming from Proxima Centauri, the closest star system to ours. A real, measured, documented signal that defied conventional explanations. The most curious thing, he was immediately silenced with technical justifications, saying that it was probably human interference. But interference from Earth traveling for light years there and returning with a regular pattern. It doesn't hit, doesn't convince. And of course, the case disappeared from the headlines as quickly as it appeared. Another example, in 2022, researchers working with the Kepler Space Telescope reported anomalous patterns coming from systems with planets in the so-called habitable zone, regions where the temperature allows the existence of liquid water. In theory, these are the places most conducive to life as we know it. The signals looked like pulses of energy with almost rhythmic intervals, similar to what we would expect from controlled, perhaps even deliberate, transmissions. But again, the data was reinterpreted as instrumental anomalies. The question that remains is, how far will this repeated coincidence go? And why, even with so much technology and investment, have we never heard a clear announcement about this? What intrigues me and, perhaps also disturbs you right now is this pattern of subtle denial. The fact that this information exists, is recorded, analyzed, but is always over-explained. It's as if there was a mentality established within the agencies protect, minimize, control the narrative. We are not talking here about flying saucers hovering over cities, but about something much more sophisticated. Something that requires sensitivity, investigation, and courage to be understood. And all of this raises another question. What if the signals aren't just random detections? What if they are tests, ways to measure our ability to perceive, to respond, to recognize that we are not alone? What if the transformation that is to come is not technological, but one of consciousness? Because, deep down, the impact of a revelation like this cannot be measured only with scientific data. It affects values, beliefs, our vision of existence. And perhaps that's why silence is the most convenient response. While governments discuss budgets for new missions and NASA announces projects to send humans to Mars, why is so little said about star systems that already have conditions similar to Earth? Is there a real search effort, or an even greater effort to keep attention away from the real targets? Because if there is intelligent life beyond Earth and signs of this are being detected, the next logical step would be to communicate, prepare, and dialogue with society. But what we see is the opposite: silence, redirection, and often public discredit of those who dare to question the official version. This journey for truth is not about proving the impossible. It's about looking at the details that many ignore, about interpreting the leaks, the data, the reactions, about realizing that what they call conspiracy theory is often just a part of the puzzle that hasn't yet been allowed to fit together. And it is precisely at this point that our conversation gains strength. Because when you start to question deeply, when you open up space to think differently, you start to see the world with different eyes. And, most importantly, you begin to see through the layers, from the noises of the ready versions. The simple act of reflecting is already a form of resistance, a conscious choice, a decision not to be content with little. Write it in the comments. I'm on this journey too. I want to know who else is with me, seeing beyond the obvious. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what's behind these discoveries goes far beyond telescopes pointed at the sky and scientific graphs with incomprehensible data. The real plot is what Noah said, in what hides between the lines of official statements, in the evasive expressions of scientists during interviews, and in the abrupt cuts of live broadcasts when something unexpected appears on the monitor. We're talking about a network carefully structured to maintain control of the narrative about what is and isn't considered possible. When it comes to intelligent life beyond Earth, behind the laboratories and satellite dishes, there is something much more dense. Decisions made in rooms that most people will never see. Classified missions that do not appear in public reports. Traces of signals that are intercepted, stored, and analyzed beyond the reach of the open scientific community. There are documents that mention cosmic anomalies with patterns that do not repeat in nature, binary sequence transmissions, and even signals that appeared at a modulated frequency, something completely outside the standard spatial background noise. And yet, instead of studying with transparency, what we see is information archived under national security seals. Why so much secrecy? What is behind this government silence? The usual justification is the same. Avoid panic, but is it really? Or is there a deeper fear of losing control over what it would mean for humanity to know that we were never alone? The transformation generated by this type of truth would be immense. It would touch religions, philosophy, politics, power. This isn't just science, it is a global mindset change. A revelation like this reconfigures the way human beings understand their place in the universe. And what intrigues me is the pattern, a pattern of meticulous concealment. Think of the various episodes in which space agencies lost contact with probes at critical moments. Entire missions disappear without leaving a public trace. Data that should be accessible to the global scientific community simply disappears or is classified. Doesn't it seem strange? How is it possible to justify so many communication cuts with satellites, especially in regions of space where we know there are planets with the potential to harbor life? We are no longer talking about guesswork or disconnected theories. We're talking about verified patterns, decisions that follow a script that points to the systematic cover-up of Carup. Something bigger. The behind-the-scenes of space exploration are much more nebulous than they usually show in cute TV documentaries. There is a game of influence, of spatial geopolitics, of who controls information and decides what the population should or should not know, and when you put it all together, unexplained signs, loss of selective communication, programs that exist unofficially, a picture begins to form. An uncomfortable image, but impossible to ignore. Because if there is intelligent life being detected, and these detections are being suppressed, then the question that remains is no longer does it exist, but rather, why hide? And even more, what do these signs represent that can be so dangerous to reveal? There is a possibility that many avoid touching, but that needs to be put on the table. What if these signals are not just distant curiosity, but a clear attempt at contact? A real attempt to communicate, ignored, silenced, or redirected to highly restricted sectors. May seem absurd at first glance, but history is full of truths that were treated as delusions before proving undeniable. Electricity, gravity, invisible germs. Everything that challenges common sense meets resistance. And the same is happening here. This journey in search of truth is not comfortable. It requires a genuine willingness to question everything, to investigate what many prefer to sweep under the rug. But it is precisely this discomfort that paves the way for a new way of seeing. Sincere doubt is always more valuable than imposed certainty. Comment there. That makes sense to me. I want to feel like those who are also starting to see beyond the official versions. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because as we begin to unravel what could really be hidden, the pieces begin to fit together in an almost disconcerting way. It's not just a matter of detecting a strange signal here or there. It's about what to do with this information. Who controls the flow? Who decides what can be shown and what needs to be deleted? You've probably heard of the famous WOW signal. Recorded in 1977, a signal peak coming from the constellation Sagittarius, which lasted exactly 72 seconds and was never repeated. At the time, the SETI project, one of the main programs searching for extraterrestrial intelligence, was in an uproar. It was the kind of sign that science expected to receive if there was, in fact, an attempt at communication by an advanced civilization. And the most curious thing is that, after the initial impact, everything was silent. Nothing more was officially said. No relevant continuation was presented. And over time, what could have been the greatest event in modern history was swept into an obscure corner of science, turned into a footer of articles, as if it were just a curious anomaly. But the story doesn't stop there. Over the following years, other similar signals with a mathematical pattern, Stable frequency and distant origin were recorded by radio telescopes in Russia, Canada, and even Brazil. All archived, analyzed, and then discarded with forced teeth explanations. The official justification generally falls into one of three categories: human interference, equipment failure, or statistical coincidence. But is it really plausible that such specific events, so in line with scientific expectations of an artificial signal, happen repeatedly and are always just coincidence? And here comes a crucial point. When talking about programs like SETI, the image given to the public is one of total transparency, an open search for signals, and science for everyone. But what few know is that behind the scenes, there is a strong connection between these projects and government agencies, including NASA itself. Much of the raw data captured by these systems is not accessible to the general public. They are filtered, passed on, and often analyzed by internal departments even before any disclosure. This means we only see the surface, what they want us to see. There are reports from former scientists and former collaborators of these programs that point to a reality that is very different from the official version. People who directly participated in the screening of these signs and who claim that not all data reached the press. Some were classified as confidential for international security reasons. Others simply disappeared from the databases. Coincidence or censorship? Now imagine a signal with a logical structure coming from a distant solar system, captured by our equipment, and which, by decision of a few, is muffled, archived, forgotten. This is not just scientific omission. It's a political decision, a conscious choice to prevent society as a whole from facing the truth. And this truth goes far beyond the existence of intelligent life. It involves reevaluating everything: our history, our role in the universe, our deepest beliefs. The hidden truth about these signs is not about green aliens or flying saucers in the backyard. It's about information that would completely transform the way we think about existence and contact. And perhaps this is the biggest reason to remain silent. The psychological, cultural, and social impact would be unpredictable. It's not just science, it's mind control of perception, collective journey. And when we observe that some of NASA's missions coincide with periods of unusual signal activity, and that some of these missions mysteriously lost contact, like the Mars Observer Probe in 1993 or Beagle 2 in 2003, a disturbing pattern begins to emerge. Whenever there's something potentially revealing, something fails. Communication is cut off. The data does not appear. And it all ends with the same cold sentence: technical failure. There is a difference between real failure and convenient failure. And when this is repeated systematically for decades, the coincidence narrative loses its strength. What remains is the question no one wants to ask out loud: what exactly are NASA and the governments behind it hiding from us? And more, what would happen if these signals were officially recognized as evidence of intelligence? The answer may be more frightening than the contact itself. Write it in the comments. I'm on this journey too. I want to know who else is noticing this hidden pattern and starting to see what's really behind the silence. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we start to cross-reference reports, documents, and images with the right time and a careful eye, it is impossible not to notice that the coincidences are too numerous to be just ... coincidences. There is evidence, and they are not few. There are real records, very high-definition images, internal documents, excerpts from interviews, and even prints of communications between scientists that make one thing clear: something big is being kept away from our eyes. And perhaps what is at stake here is precisely control over the impact that this hidden truth could have. Let's start with what can be seen. There are public images, yes, but there is also another layer, the one that only appears when you access alternative databases, or when former collaborators decide to open their mouths. One of these images, for example, shows an exoplanet in the Lyra constellation, detected by the Kepler telescope, whose atmospheric composition exhibits levels of methane and oxygen that together suggest ongoing biological activity. Do you know what they did with that information? It was recorded in an internal technical note, not released to the press, and soon after, data about that planet disappeared from the public panel. Detail: a few weeks later, the Kepler mission suffered an irreversible failure in the pointing system and was officially terminated in parallel. Leaked emails between technicians and engineers linked to SETI and NASA came to light, revealing discussions about an intermittent signal coming from the Tau SETI constellation, a system with planets in the habitable zone and which, coincidentally, was no longer mentioned in scientific reports after these internal communications. And excerpts from these emails explicitly mentions the phrase, possible artificial origin, keep confidential until committee review. This is not speculation. It's documented. And no matter how much they tried to deny it, time and institutional behavior reinforce what the documents already suggest. There is something being deliberately erased from public discourse, and it doesn't stop there. Interviews with former scientists, such as a former researcher who worked for years behind the scenes on NASA's SETI mission, reveal that anomalous electromagnetic signals were detected near Titan, one of Saturn's moons, the most unsettling. These signals had standardized variation, as if they were coded. This researcher reported that, after insisting that the case be made public, he was removed from the project and had access to the databases revoked. Curious, right? The pattern repeats itself in different projects, different locations, different times. Whenever something potentially revealing appears, some technical glitch occurs. Some bureaucratic justification is used to divert attention, and the public investigation is closed. But the leaks persist, as if the truth insisted on slipping through the cracks. Another curious point involves Hubble, which in 2013 captured a sequence of images of an exoplanet with traces of irregular lighting on the surface, as if there were a controlled light source there, and not just solar reflection. Immediately, the image was removed from the official gallery. But, like everything on the internet, someone had already downloaded it. And when the image reappeared on independent forums, the explanation was quick: exposure error. But anyone who analyzed the photo technically realized that the pattern of reflected light did not match a photographic error. It matched infrastructure. Something that emits light at a stable frequency, at a fixed point on the surface of a planet that should have absolutely nothing. And the more we investigate, the more this web expands. It's not just scientists or engineers who have been speaking out. Pilots, military personnel, satellite operators, and even former NASA third-party contractors report seeing images or records that simply could not be commented on. Some talk about silence clauses valid for life. Others in environments with restricted access where certain analyses could only be carried out under supervision. And of course, when they tried to take this out, there were veiled threats, sudden shutdowns, unstable labels. But why all this? What is so dangerous about recognizing that there are indeed intelligent signals being detected on exoplanets? What is so threatening about letting the population know that we are not alone? The answer may lie less in science and more in power. Because from the moment humanity accepts the existence of other intelligent life forms, the authority structure changes. The US versus them logic loses strength. Religions will need to adapt. Governments will lose their monopoly on knowledge. The transformation will be inevitable, and many are not ready to lose that control. This is why every document, every deleted image, every signal reclassified as noise has a gigantic symbolic weight. They're not just deleting data. They are erasing possibilities. They are controlling the collective imagination, They are shaping the narrative so that anything that deviates from the conventional seems ridiculous, fanciful, insane. Thus, the truth remains discredited even when it is right in front of our eyes. Comment there. That makes sense to me. I want to know who is seeing beyond the surface and recognizing this pattern that many still insist on denying. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because when we compare this evidence with the official versions presented by NASA and other institutions, an abyss reveals itself. A gulf between what is said publicly and what actually appears to be happening behind the scenes. And this abyss raises an uncomfortable question. If there is nothing strange, why so much secrecy? NASA's official position to this day is quite conservative. Whenever a new signal captured by radio telescopes appears, the explanation follows a pattern: cosmic noise, terrestrial interference, instrument failure. It is as if any possibility that goes beyond the traditional understanding of physics is discarded before it is even considered. And sure, that sounds rational, scientific, safe. But when this type of response is repeated systematically, year after year, in the face of records that defy conventional logic, what once seemed like healthy skepticism starts to sound like institutional shielding. After all, cosmic noise does not generate mathematical patterns. Terrestrial interference does not create constant pulsations that arise only in specific areas of the deep sky. And instrument failure does not explain the disappearance of images, the disappearance of data, or the silencing of professionals. Science is made up of doubts, hypotheses, tests, and above all, transparency. But when doubt is stifled, hypothesis ignored, testing censored, and transparency replaced by secrecy, we are no longer talking about science. We are talking about narrative control. And this is where the game becomes more delicate. Because NASA, even though it is a scientific agency, is also a political arm. It operates with public funds, responds to strategic interests, and, in many cases, collaborates with armed forces. It is not uncommon for certain space discoveries, even when scientific, to first go through national security committees. And the question that no one wants to answer clearly is, why? If we are just observing the universe, cataloging stars, studying planets, why involve military agencies? Why classify files related to signals captured from exoplanets? Everything is noise, as they claim. What is there to hide? This is where the official narrative begins to fail, because it demands that we believe in explanations that, no matter how technical they seem, do not respond to the totality of the evidence. They demand that we believe that, after decades of exploration, billions invested, super telescopes orbiting space, and networks of radio telescopes monitoring the sky around the clock, all we can capture is just static. This stance is, at the very least, disconnected from logic. And more than that, it is infantilizing. It assumes that humanity is not ready to deal with the truth, that the people need to be protected from certain information, as if we were incapable of understanding the impact of a revelation. But is that really it? Or does the real fear lie in the loss of power on the part of those who have always had a monopoly on knowledge? Because, if we're honest, the idea of intelligent life beyond Earth isn't so far-fetched anymore. Renowned scientists already recognize that, statistically, the probability of us being alone in the universe is practically zero. Stephen Hawking himself raised this possibility numerous times. Astrophysicist Carl Sagan, in his famous Drake equation, estimated that millions of civilizations could exist in our galaxy alone. So why do we still treat any signal as if it were an isolated anomaly? There is a change of mindset that needs to happen, and it begins precisely with the willingness to question officialdom. It must be understood that, in many cases, institutional skepticism is not a scientific virtue. It is a shield against the inevitable transformation that would come if certain truths were accepted. Because recognizing that we are not alone in the cosmos is recognizing that our place in the universe is not the center, but just one point among millions of possibilities. And for some power structures, this idea is dangerous. This is why, while we are offered silence, contradictions, and sealed files, we need to keep our eyes open. We need to look for more than ready-made answers. We need to understand that the journey towards truth is often made up of uncomfortable questions, confronting versions, and having the courage to see what is beyond the obvious. Comment there, that makes sense to me. I want to feel like someone is also opening their eyes to these hidden layers of reality. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because there are times when everything we thought we knew seems small in the face of new information. A detail, a revelation, a piece that didn't fit, and that suddenly transforms the entire scenario. And when I talk about transformation, it's not an exaggeration. It's that turn that changes the axis of the conversation, that tears the veil between what they call fantasy and what could be the reality they try to hide. This was the case with a transmission recorded in 2018, and which to this day almost no one has heard of. A signal coming from a specific point in the sky, more precisely from a star system located about 1,200 light-years from Earth. The frequency was extremely accurate, the pattern incredibly organized. Numerical sequences that, to any experienced astronomer, could not have been caused by known natural phenomena. The source? A planet cataloged as TOI 700d, in the habitable zone of its star, one of the most promising candidates for the existence of life outside Earth. This data was never officially released. It appeared in an internal report leaked by a former employee who worked directly with the TESS telescope analysis team. The man, whose name was withheld for security reasons, revealed that the identified pattern was initially considered an instrumental anomaly. But after internal analyses conducted outside standard protocols, it was concluded that the signal seemed, in fact, an attempt at communication. The most impactful. It didn't just contain simple pulses. There were binary repetitions, code, block-like structures, and what appeared to be an intentional message structure. Even with this information in hand, the guidance was clear: absolute silence. The research team was relocated. The signal was classified as interference, and the press, as always, had absolutely no access to anything. This was not a mistake. It was a decision. An institutional choice to ignore what could be the greatest discovery in modern history simply because it exceeded the limits of what is acceptable to disclose to the public. And the scariest thing is that this wasn't the first time. In 2003, there was a similar case with a signal coming from the direction of Gliese 581. The data was recorded, but never published in scientific journals. They were kept as provisional, until, conveniently, they disappeared from open platforms. The justification used: lack of confirmation. But this expression, in scientific circles, has already become code for "this should not be discussed." Do you notice the pattern? Whenever something escapes the predictable, whenever a discovery threatens the established paradigm, it is treated as noise. Not because it is inconclusive, but because it would be revolutionary. And revolutions require preparation. Structures change. They open doors that can never be closed. And perhaps, for those in control, the risk of losing control over the narrative is greater than the desire to show the truth. What this former employee revealed is more than technical data. It's a behind-the-scenes window into a system that manages the unknown with steady hands and rehearsed speech. A system that knows that information is power and therefore manipulates it. Because whoever has the right to decide what is real or fantastic shapes the collective imagination. And when the truth threatens that control, it is smothered with silence. But silence is not proof of absence. It is often the strongest evidence that something needs to be protected. And in this case, what is being protected is the structure of a world that still insists on seeing itself as the center of the universe. But what if we aren't? What if, at that specific point in the sky, someone or something saw us first, and you decided to call us? The impact of this is not limited to science. It touches our identity. Our mentality as a civilization. We are no longer talking about assumptions, but about decisions. Decisions to hide, not to count, to pretend it didn't happen. But the truth has a curious way of continuing to show itself, even if through gaps. Through leaks, through anonymous voices that can no longer carry the weight of what they saw alone. And it is because of these voices that we are here now, connecting dots. Listening to what was not said on national television, but which echoes more strongly with each new clue. Right there, I'm on this journey too. I want to know who is feeling this call for something bigger, for answers that long ago no longer fit into the official versions now. I want to go even deeper into this subject, because, after everything we've analyzed so far, the ignored signals, the silenced leaks, the numerical patterns that defy any conventional explanation, a question begins to form within us. And it is no longer that technical or scientific doubt. It is something more intimate, more visceral. What if it's true? What if all of this that seems like just speculation is actually part of a reality that has been carefully kept from our understanding? Because when you put the right pieces together, when you see that the same patterns of concealment repeat themselves, that the same protocols are activated every time something strange happens, you begin to understand that it's not just a theory, it's a strategy. A mindset built over decades to ensure that certain truths remain inaccessible. And this doesn't just pique our curiosity, it causes an emotional upheaval. Because if there is intelligence out there, active, conscious, perhaps even trying to communicate, and that possibility is being deliberately hidden, then we need to ask ourselves, what else are they hiding from us? Perhaps the impact of this revelation is not just on science or space exploration. Perhaps the biggest impact is on how we see ourselves, because if there are other intelligent life forms, that changes our history. It changes our spirituality, our place in the cosmos, the way we organize our priorities, our decisions, our way of living, our view of others. This transformation would not just be technological, it would be human, deep, unavoidable. Think about it. Why would the fear of revealing something like this be so great? Why secrecy, classified files, censored testimonies? Could it be that, deep down, what is feared is not contact with others, but the collapse of the control model that is based on our ignorance? Because when a hidden truth begins to come to light, it can no longer be contained. It spreads. And even if they try to deny it, the idea is already planted. And once planted, it grows inside the mind of those who decide to open their eyes. This is why this journey is so important. It's not just about the mysteries of space. It's about the courage to ask questions that most avoid, to listen to the silence and understand what it hides, to realize that the lack of response is already a response in itself, and that there is much more behind every suppressed data, every deactivated telescope, every convenient technical failure. Sometimes the greatest evidence is not in what is shown, but in what is so effortlessly hidden. In the discomfort that certain themes cause, in the forced disinterest that the media constructs in everything that threatens common sense. But the truth has its own rhythm, and it always finds an opening to appear, whether in a leaked interview, in an unauthorized document, or in a community like this, which chooses to look beyond the obvious. And now that you've walked this path with me so far, I invite you to think, what if this all actually makes sense? What if it's just the beginning of something bigger that we still can't fully understand? What does this possibility awaken in you? Fear, hope, confusion, curiosity? Whatever the feeling, it is legitimate. It is part of this journey of discovery, expansion, reconstruction of what we were taught to believe. Write it in the comments. That makes sense to me. I want to know who is also feeling that. Perhaps reality is much deeper than we were led to imagine. If you've come this far, it's because something inside you is also looking for answers. We may not have them all yet, but the truth is constructed like this: piece by piece, question by question, connection by connection. And if this content made you reflect, if it gave you value in some way, consider subscribing here to the channel. This is where we continue investigating together, without fear of questioning, with space to think beyond the obvious. Also, leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end," just so I know who really came with me this far on this journey. This helps a lot to understand who is really connecting with this type of content. And if you feel that this conversation deserves recognition, leave a like. It's not just by number, it's by sign. It's the kind of simple gesture that shows that this space makes sense to you too. There's a video here that complements everything we said, and I guarantee you, it goes even deeper into the revelations that have been ignored for decades. Click and stay with me there. The journey is just beginning.